so it's week 4 in our fall series working with the book Spiritual Economics by Eric Butterworth. We're on chapters 5 and 6, and there's a theme that ties them together. The theme is gratitude. Every year as Thanksgiving comes around and our thoughts turn to gratitude, there's an essay by a fellow named Garrison Keillor that I like to read. You all know who Garrison Keillor is, right? He's the creator and longtime host of a Prairie Home Companion on NPR. I guess he's getting ready to retire next year, and he's grooming a couple of people to step in and keep the show going, so that's always good to know. But he's an excellent writer, and there's one paragraph of that essay that really stands out for me, and I think it has a great message for today's topic. Here's what he writes. He says, none of us is self-sufficient. Every good thing, every morsel of food comes directly from God, who expects us to pay attention and be joyful. A large task for people from the Midwest, where our idea of a compliment is, it could have been worse. It's one of the reasons I think I've always loved that show, because as a 47-year resident of Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, I am here to testify and to be a witness and to confess that what he says is true. It could have been worse, the great motto of the people from the Midwest. And another thing that Garrison says about us that I think is kind of true is this. He says, we come from people who brought us up to believe that life is a struggle. And if you should feel really happy, be patient, this will pass. And it will, just like everything else in life, it will pass. He must be a Buddhist or something. But the other thing he says, pay attention and be joyful. Pay attention and be joyful. Why should that be such a large task, even for people not from the Midwest? Why should that be such a large task? We can choose to go through life asleep and resentful, or we can choose to be awake and joyful. Which one do you think works better? What would you rather have? Asleep and resentful or awake and joyful? I think that's one of them, they're rhetorical questions. I mean, awake and joyful. Yeah. It's a really powerful formula, because awake and joyful equals gratefulness. Gratefulness equals great fullness. And great fullness means we are filled with the joy of living, and the idea is to be filled to the point where it overflows out into everything else, so we can pass it on. And it all starts with paying attention, being awake, and finding that joy of living that's there for us to take. So chapter 5, Spiritual Economics. The title is The Grateful Heart. And Eric starts off by asking a simple but profound question. This one here, he says, what is your most important asset? Now, if you asked me that question, say, 20 years ago, I probably would have said my law degree, my profession. Being a trial lawyer defined me in ways that went beyond just making money, and I'm sure a lot of us have similar experiences to share. We can be defined by career, we can be defined by possessions. And it's really good to value those things. Those are things that we don't want to take for granted, but as we've already talked about in preceding weeks here, the one thing that career, possessions, and stuff has in common is that they can be taken away by forces beyond our control. So Eric invites us to go deeper. He wants us to look for an asset that can't be diminished or destroyed by those circumstances beyond our control. And what he tells us is that when we do that, when we look within, when we go deeper, we will find that our most important asset is this: conscious control of your life. Everyone has it by right of consciousness. The other thing that Eric calls it is this. He calls it the healing influence, the healing influence of a controlled life sustained by an attitude of gratitude. So that's the goal here. We are in control of the consciousness that we bring to every single situation. Gratitude is a key ingredient. It's the key ingredient for a healthy and successful life. Another thing that Eric tells us is that gratitude is not merely a reactive emotion. So often we think of gratitude as something that we express in reaction to receiving something. And Eric says that that's a limited viewpoint. He said that gratitude is not merely a reactive emotion, it is causative energy. It has the ability to bring a state of consciousness into being. And that's really the metaphysical lesson in these chapters. Gratitude, thanksgiving are powerful agents of causation and positive change. And we've known about this for a long, long time. We can go all the way back to the early 300s BC. The Greek philosopher Plato once said that a grateful mind is a great mind which eventually attracts to itself great things. Early 3rd century BC. And then we go forward to Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore, who put it this way. He said, "It has been found by experience that a person increases his blessings by being grateful for what he has." Sounds simple. And Charles uses the word blessings here in a rather generic sense. He uses the word blessings to include things like happiness and our own sense of well-being. Now, if you really want to talk about an expert on gratitude and thanksgiving, here's a guy that I've talked about before, Brother David Stendal-Rast, who is a Benedictine monk with a monastery in upstate New York, and he's made gratitude his life's work. He has a website, and I give you these web addresses in the handout in your bulletin. His website is called gratefulness.org. There he is. He says, we have thousands of opportunities every day to be grateful for having good weather, to have slept well last night, to be able to get up, to be healthy, to have enough to eat. There's opportunity upon opportunity to be grateful. That's what life is. So this has been his life's work, and his website has all sorts of resources on it and essays. And in one of his own essays, he tells the story of a woman named Etty Hillesum. Etty was a young Jewish woman from Holland, and she was known as a philosopher and a mystic, and she died in a Nazi death camp when she was only 29 years old. She wrote this in one of her journals. She said, "You have made me so rich. Oh God, please let me share out your beauty with open hands. Sometimes when I stand in some corner of the camp, my feet planted on your earth, my eyes raised towards your heaven, tears sometimes run down my face, tears of deep emotion and gratitude. The beat of my heart has grown deeper, more active, and yet more peaceful. And it is as if I were all the time storing up inner riches." I think some of the key words in that whole thing are some corner of the camp. You know where she is when she's writing this. She's in a Nazi death camp. I don't think life gets much worse than being in a Nazi death camp. She's in the prime of her life, as I said, 29 years old, no money, no possessions, nothing. Everything taken away by circumstances beyond her control. And yet, in the middle of it all, standing in a death camp, she has this overwhelming sense of gratitude that feels to her like she's storing up inner riches. And of course, I'm not suggesting that her story is unique. You can find other stories of people who had the same experience, but it's instructive. and it's especially poetic in the way that she puts it. And we might be tempted to ask the question, there she is, 29 years old, what does she have to show for her life? Was her life a failure, or was it a success? Well, a materialistic definition of success might brand her a failure, not in the sense of rendering a judgment against her, but basically that she didn't achieve the kind of things that you're expected to achieve. She didn't go out on top in a materialistic sense. That's sometimes the way our culture likes to look at success. Well, Eric wants us to have a new definition of success. In spiritual economics, Eric tells us we need a new model of success, where the good life refers more to values than to valuables. More to values than to valuables. So, in that little piece that Eddie wrote in her journal, what we see is that she's given up the idea of being a victim. There's no victim mentality there. She stopped measuring her self-worth by material standards. And when she did that, she discovered this entirely different state of consciousness. So, how would it be to have just a little bit of that kind of consciousness in our own lives? What can we do to make that happen? Well, the good news is that we can make it happen. It is possible. One idea, in addition to Brother David's website at the Network for Grateful Living, there's another organization that's gotten involved quite recently, I think, in promoting the practice of gratitude. That organization is called UC Berkeley. The University of California now has this project called The Greater Good. I don't know if you've heard of this yet. It's called The Greater Good, the Science of a Meaningful Life. One of their core themes is gratitude. Among others, you can see their core themes: gratitude, altruism, compassion, empathy, forgiveness, happiness. The first one up is gratitude. And what they say is that for too long we have taken gratitude for granted. We've taken gratitude for granted. And here's what they say about that. They say that recently scientists have begun to chart a course of research aimed at understanding gratitude and the circumstances in which it flourishes or diminishes. They're finding that people who practice gratitude consistently report a host of benefits, such as these: stronger immune systems, lower blood pressure, higher levels of positive emotions, more joy, more optimism and happiness, acting with more generosity and compassion, and feeling less lonely and isolated. This project really is the very definition of spirituality without religion, because you're not required to accept their claims upon insufficient evidence. In fact, they strive to make sure that the claims they make about gratitude or those other core themes up there are supported by evidence. And this website offers really a lifetime of resources for exploring and cultivating gratitude. They have quizzes that you can use as an assessment tool. They have videos, they have essays, they have science-based activities that can help us to develop an attitude of gratitude. And one of the activities that they recommend is called 3 Good Things. It's really simple. Every day for a week, we write down 3 things that went well during the day. And you give a brief explanation for why it went well. And they say it's really important to actually write it down and not just do this as an exercise in our heads, because the act of writing it down is just one more way of really imprinting it on our consciousness. Doesn't have to be anything earth-shattering. Sometimes I think we tend to be too grandiose when we put these practices to work, and it doesn't have to be anything earth-shattering. Did someone bring you a cup of coffee in the morning? Did the dog behave on the morning walk? Huh? How about that great parking place at the mall? You know, we kind of make fun of this idea of manifesting parking places, and it is kind of silly and full of magical thinking, but at the same time, when it's there, be grateful. Something went well for you, and it's something that you can write down, because these seemingly small things have a way of adding up. It's a way of cultivating both gratitude and optimism. They cite some studies. They cite a Yale University study that says being optimistic, especially if we do it during our middle years in life, being optimistic can actually increase lifespan by around 7.5 years. And that's after they account for things like age, gender, socioeconomic status, physical health, and other things that enter into the equation. 7.5 years. That's nothing to sniff at. They did a survey, another survey, showing that optimistic people were, as I said before, happier. They had less stress in their lives, and that these optimistic people had some habits or practices in common that gave them that advantage. And here's 3 of the things that they do. They express gratitude, they're randomly kind, and they reappraise their lives. It's kind of what Eric was getting at. The reappraisal of life is when we sit down and say, what is my most important asset? Things like that. We really go deep. There was another study that showed that people who do 5 acts of kindness each day had a greater sense of well-being and happiness. That was another practice that fit into the equation. But they also point out that it's really important not to turn any of these things into chores, or to turn it into just another thing that we add to our to-do. Oh God, I got to write down those 3 things. I don't have enough time. You know, did I do my 5 acts of kindness and then beat yourself up because you did 4 instead of 5? That's totally self-defeating. So we have to learn how to approach these things in a playful way, and to engage them to the best of our ability, and then be kind to ourselves. You know, if we don't come up with 5, we don't go on a guilt trip, but we also have to make sure that we give ourselves credit for the kind of things that we think maybe don't count. Letting someone in line at a store, or at a traffic light, or when you're merging, where we're conscious of the fact that you're cooperating, an act of kindness. It all counts. It all counts. So gratitude, what we're learning is that gratitude is a great way to keep circumstances from dictating the way we show up in the world. Yeah, we all feel angry, cynical, depressed at times, but nobody wants that to be their total experience. So finding something to be grateful for in the middle of misfortune is the key to keep that from happening, the key to keep from getting into this pattern where the circumstances dictate our frame of mind. The slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, as Shakespeare once wrote, can turn us into bitter and angry creatures. The antidote to that is gratitude. Brother David says that even in the worst kind of difficulty, there is always a blessing. Now, this doesn't mean that we have to like every difficult situation. This doesn't mean that we have to find a way to call every difficult situation good. This isn't about denial and magical thinking. But the truth is that every challenge that we face has the potential to bring out some gift from within us. The best question we can ask ourselves in a difficult situation is this: what positive quality within me is being called forth by this situation? What positive quality within me is being called forth by this situation? I don't have to like the situation. I don't have to find some way. I don't have to twist myself into a pretzel to call it good. Just look at what positive quality is being called forth in me. And as always, it's going to be something powerful and good. It's going to be something like courage, strength, forgiveness, patience, love, compassion, empathy, those kinds of qualities. And when those qualities come forth, and especially when we consciously allow them to come forth. That's the blessing. That's the blessing. And in fact, we are the blessing. That's a key distinction in these situations. The blessing that comes forth, we are the blessing. We aren't blessed by the situation. We are called forth to be the blessing. So, the message today, look at life, pay attention, be joyful, be grateful, and then be a blessing. See you next week. Thank you.